Well, it wasn't my idea. At the time, I was working for the Health Funding Authority in government, which I loved. Had an amazing boss, Rob Cooper, who's passed now, but he was just incredible to work for. But there was a change of government, and they decided to cut up the health funding authority into 21 district health boards. And I thought, well, I didn't really want to move from a national role, which I was holding, to, move back to a district lower, scope role. But I also didn't know what else I'd want to do. I actually thought, oh, maybe I should go back to Te Puni Kōkiri, where I'd come from before I got into health. But it was actually my boss at the Health Funding Authority, one of the other general managers, David Moore, who said, "Why don't you go consulting?" I was like, "Oh God, I don't go consulting." And he's like, "Why not?" It's kind of what you do. You're out amongst the communities all the time. You're working with the providers. Give it a go, kind of stuff. And he said, "I tell you what, you get a consulting firm set up, and I'm going to keep you here until you have your first contract. Then I'll let you go." Because he had to, let all the staff go. And I was nervous as you work in government, you get kind of a safety blanket around you in terms of security and support, and you sort of get to know what you're doing. And I just wasn't comfortable. But anyway, we went to, at the time, the Health Funding Authority had a kaumātua advisory group, Te Rōpū Āwhina, which included Auntie Mati Kaiwai, who's, of course, Aparaina Ngata's baby. And I talked to her about it, and she was like, "Oh, absolutely, you should do it. You should do it. And you give me a couple of days and I'll think of a name for you." And I was like, "Okay." So she rings me back a couple of days later and she goes, "I had a moi moia and I was envisaging you out there uplifting our people. So here's your name, Kāhui Tautoko." And I went, "Okay, Auntie." Not that I'd ever argue with her, but I thought, okay, she's given this name, and those words have stuck with me through this entire time. You've just got to keep uplifting our people, make sure you're leaving things in a better place than it was when you arrived. And yeah, it's been just the underpinning of everything that we do. And so, yeah, out of the blue, I'm a firm believer that somebody up there puts me in certain places at certain times, because these opportunities I don't plan for just appear. And an ex-colleague from the Health Funding Authority had moved to the Department of Corrections, and she had been talking to someone and said, "Hey, I heard you're going consulting, and I want you to come and do this project over in corrections." And I was like, "Corrections? Well, that's not my, wheelhouse." And she said, "No, it's to review all the health services in the prisons. And health services, so come and do it." And yeah, long story short, by the time we did the business setup and, got a GST number and a logo and all of that stuff, my boss David let me go, and I had a contract, and we were working, was my friend and I at the time. We were working for the Department of Corrections, and we could feel similarities, right? Because in health there were 21 district health boards, and I think at the time there were 21 prisons, and we had to go and visit every single one of them, the women's prisons, the men's prisons, the youth, and look at what healthcare they were getting, and whether it was meeting the standards that expected. So we did this big review, bit of word of mouth. Next minute, we've got another contract with Ministry of Social Development, and it just grew from there. We were like, "Okay, I think we might be able to do this," And so from our humble beginnings, it just kind of took off, mostly word of mouth. just people we had built relationships with in our previous employment who were like, hey, I heard your contracting, come here, come here. So that's how it began. When we started Kāhui Tautoko, I did go to Aotearoa Mate for our name, but we also went to the chairman of the Health Funding Authority Board at the time, Graham Scott, who used to be the head of Treasury. And he was wonderful, very wonderful with our people, and we took him out to maraes and stuff all the time. But anyway, I went to Graham and said, oh, I'd really love your advice, starting up this consulting firm. And so I've done what do you call it, like a compendium profile document. I'd written this document, had the logo on the front and listed all these, we're this, and we're going to offer these services, and this is who we are. But I had made the mistake of doing Google searches for all the other consultants and seeing what theirs looked like, and thought, okay, there's the standard, so ours needs to look like that. That's where we need to pitch it. And so we wrote it to really mirror what other consultants, including the Big Four, were doing. How do they talk about the business? And I gave the draft to Graham, and he looked at it and he just went, who are these people? And I went, it's us. And he's like, no, this is not you. I don't recognise you in this at all. And he threw it on the ground. And he goes, Mara, the one thing I can tell you is don't be like everyone else. Just be you. That it's good enough. Like, don't think you have to copy everyone else. Just be you and talk about the work the way you would talk about it if the whānau or the Māori organisation was sitting in front of you. Talk about it that way. Communicate it that way. Don't write this profile stuff. So he was very disappointed in me for going down that line. But it really was quite a wake-up call that you have to believe that you're good enough, and you have to think, oh, but if we don't look like other consultancies, then are we going to be considered real consultants? And you go through this lack of confidence, I think, in questioning. But he was very clear about that. And biggest lesson. So through all the work we'd done in the bin. And the other lesson came a little bit later when we started to think about opening up an office in Canada. We were thinking about a name. We were like, this Māori name we have in New Zealand, that no one's going to understand that over in Canada. So we need to come up with a name that, they will recognise, and, a logo. And we were going to have eagles and bears and, stuff that resonates with First Nations people. And Auntie Matia was the one saying, why are you doing that? And I went, well, so that the Canada people understand, and she goes, just because you're moving to Canada doesn't mean you stop being Māori. So you stick with your name and you stick with your kaupapa and you take that kaupapa over there. And I was like, oh, true. So, you learn these little lessons of just being the true you and staying who you are, and not thinking, how do I be like them in order for people to recognise you, So those two probably lessons have stuck with me, not just in starting Kāhui, but also relocating to Canada. Which is why our names and logos are consistent. We're Kāhui Tautoko in New Zealand, Kāhui Tautoko Canada up in Canada, and Kāhui Tautoko Hawaii over in Hawaii. Because fundamentally we're still the same. We're still the same whānau, we're still the same values, we still aspire to do the same things, we want to have the same relationships. So those were big lessons. Again, didn't plan for it. Oh, no, well, that's not true. We did, after, I think, 4 or 5 years working, we did sort of come up with a bit of a strategic plan. We were very good bureaucrats and do our strategic planning and, assess our performance at the end of the year. But we had a plan to say, maybe one day we could work in Australia. because it was close by, and help our Indigenous people and work in the health system. And then we could maybe work in the Pacific Islands, So we did have a bit of a vision of perhaps doing something. We didn't have a timeline or anything. We just thought the work that we're doing is so transferable across sectors that perhaps it was also transferable across countries, that we as Indigenous people, we're all facing these same issues. Government agencies are facing the same issues, trying to address inequity and working with Indigenous people. And so we did think maybe it's transferable. We should, one day explore the opportunity. But yeah, out of the blue, in 2007, I get a call from a colleague at the Ministry of Health, and he says, hey, I've got this Canadian delegation here at the moment. They've come over to meet with the Ministry of Health, but they have a First Nations doctor with them who wants to go and visit some Māori providers this week. And I went, I'd like to give them a bit more notice. But he said, can you organise something with some of the people you work with? And I said, yeah, okay, send him over, and we'll see what we can do. Anyway, he couldn't make the day I had scheduled, and we were at the last week of the year before Christmas. And so he rang me, this doctor, and he says, can I come Thursday? Would that work Thursday? And I went, we're actually having our staff whānau Christmas party that day. And he goes, that's perfect. So anyway, he turns up at the staff Christmas party with all the whānau there, and kids and kai and wine and stuff. And he sat with us, and we just connected straight away. Couldn't stop laughing. He just spent hours with us. And it got to the point he was like, you guys need to come to Canada. We need help over there. And your team and the skills is perfect for what we want. And of course, we're typical Māori. We're like, yeah, man, we'll come to Canada. Sign this napkin, give us a contract, and we're off. And it was all a big joke, we all thought, yeah, that'd be cool going to Canada. And he did. He signed this. I think I've still got the napkin with this $100,000 contract from Canada, and he signed it. But we really did connect. He was just hilarious. So then, and we forgot about it. Went on holiday. Come back in January, he starts emailing, and he goes, so when can you come? And I thought, I think this guy's serious. So I was like, look, why don't you use First Nation consultants? Why would you want us, And he started telling us that they didn't really have a sector of First Nation consultants who work in healthcare. And I learned much later why that was so. But he was like, just come for a visit. Just come for a visit. Let me introduce you to different people in the Ministry of Health, and and you decide after that. So long story short, we ended up setting up an office by kind of June the following year. And the main reason for them wanting help is because they were setting up the First Nations Health Authority, very first one in Canada, here in British Columbia. And so we became part of that whole establishment process, all the engagement with the communities and the chiefs from each of the nations, what they wanted to envisage in their First Nation Health Authority, what values it should have, what vision it has, what they want to do differently from how the federal government had delivered healthcare on the reservations. So it was just such awesome work. And because we got to meet so many of the nations across the whole of BC, being part of the engagement work and travelling, it was just, I kind of thought, well, we've got a work visa for 3 years, so we'll probably live in Canada for 3 years, contribute as much as we can and go home. Well, as it turned out, I ended up living here for 12 years. But that's how it began, just this man, Dr. Evan Adams, just appearing at our Christmas party one year from a, just happenstance kind of referral from a mate at the Ministry of Health. And that's where it all started. I found out later that he's, prior to becoming a medical doctor, he was an actor and quite a famous actor here in Canada. And he was on these films and shows. And so, yeah, he's a bit of a movie star doctor, but he's just got the most amazing sense of humour. And we always just gave each other a hard time about lots of things and ended up, calling each other girlfriend. So he'd be like, girlfriend, what are you doing? Come and have a coffee. And yeah, so great friend. I will owe him forever for suddenly appearing on our doorstep back in Christmas 2007 and just opening this door for us. And yeah, so we got to bring 4 people over, and we all pretty much worked for the First Nation Health Authority startup right through till it became launched. And now it's a fully operational health authority, been going since then. By the time I returned home, it was really interesting to see that New Zealand was looking at a Māori health authority for the first time. So, there you go, sort of 15 years later, ending up back home involved in a Māori health authority. So I could take a lot of lessons from the processes that the First Nation Health Authority used and how they kept connected to their communities and their local leadership. Canada, probably 2 big projects. One would be just the privilege of having our team kind of absorbed into the First Nation Health Authority setup. And, it's a big step for them to hire all of us to bring a team of 4 into their organisation. And although we were doing different roles, I ended up kind of as the senior advisor to the chief executive and basically followed him everywhere and wrote papers and all sorts of stuff and got to meet a lot of people. But being part of that process, just incredible, absolutely incredible, and being exposed to many, many, many First Nations in BC. And after a while, you get recognised as that girl from New Zealand because you talk funny. And so, yeah, I formed a lot of relationships there. And the other big project in Canada we've done was a national project for the Assembly of First Nations. And the Assembly, based over in the capital in Ottawa, is the National Assembly of all First Nations for Canada. So they're the matua body, for all First Nations. And they contracted us to do a review of a multifaceted health program across Canada. So we had to go to every province up in the Northern Territories, right across to Nova Scotia, and meet with First Nation people and get their perspectives on these programs. And that was not only did we get the privilege of travelling Canada and getting to come into First Nation communities, all who are different languages, different cultures. Out east, you have a lot of First Nations who speak French. That's their day-to-day. So we had to have a French translator with us to help us do the engagement over there. People with different accents. We just met so many people, and we were like, we have got to get this right. We've got to hear what they're saying, and we've got to document what they're saying. And we ended up producing these massive reports, but we had such a good time. They just looked after us everywhere we went, from the east coast to the west coast and up north. And fed us and housed us and looked after us, and very curious about New Zealand and where it is and how far away it is and all that kind of stuff. But yeah, massive project that did lead to quite a lot of changes to that program to benefit the communities. And they did say these were direct results of the recommendations that we'd made from the voices of the people. So yeah, those two are probably the biggest impact projects over here. And then, in between that, we're working for lots of individual First Nations, doing projects for them and their communities with their kaimahi, and then next minute, they're saying, hey, come to our cultural day. It's in 2 weeks' time. And, oh, if you guys do the Maori singing, can you do a Maori singing for us at our cultural day or our powwow or, and you just, by being in community, you end up getting invited to a whole lot of other things where suddenly our little team is in a canoe racing, the local First Nation in another canoe. But that's the richness that's when it goes beyond the work. You've sort of finished the project, but they're saying, come back and come to our community day, come to our anniversary of our, constitution, or come to our chief's celebration. And we just get invited to so many things. That's really awesome. Even though we might not have worked for them for 3 years, we still get invited to come to their events. Well, we had moved over here in 2008, so it must have been 2009 when we got our contract and we had to go and visit communities. And I'm thinking it was probably Mania Poto who worked for us then, and she and her husband Ben Ngaya. And Mania said, well, if we're going to visit communities, we need to have our waiata kind of sorted. And she just took our staff. She was just like, well, why don't we learn this and this and this? And so the staff, our little staff team of 4 or 5, we were doing waiata in our house. And then I think we started, reaching out to other Māori. We went to Waitangi Day and met some more Māori, and went to Anzac Day and met some more Māori, and you go to different, rugby games. And then we ran into Wes, who was like, we were telling him how we were learning waiata, and he was like, oh, can I come along and join you? And he goes, I know another guy, Wayne, he plays the guitar. If you want me to get Wayne. And yeah, bring Wayne. So they joined us. So we had us plus Wayne and Wes. And then, you'd meet more Māori and they just started joining. And somewhere along the line, I think we still thought of ourselves as just having waiata sessions. For us, it was really so we were prepared when we were visiting communities. But we went to a function where the New Zealand consulate was there. Forget the consulate general's name, but staff were there. And then they asked, can your group come and perform some waiata at one of their New Zealand functions in the New Zealand consulate offices? And it was like an evening cocktail thing, and they were hosting these dignitaries and stuff. We were like, oh, yeah. So we went along and sang a couple of songs. Eventually, I don't know, maybe 6 months later, after we had done a few of these informal things, we actually got invited by, I think it was New Zealand Trade and Enterprise, said, we'd love you to come to Las Vegas and perform down there for this big tourism event. And we were like, we're not really a very pro group, what you're thinking. And Mania was like, well, then we better get practicing. So we started practicing officially. They were developing us a bracket. And by then, I think we had about a dozen members. And we started really rehearsing every week, getting a bracket together, doing it really professionally because we were being paid to go to Las Vegas, and we wanted to go to Las Vegas, of course. And we supported New Zealand tourism at their event. It was amazing. But then they pass your name on to New Zealand Trade and Enterprise, who pass your name on to New Zealand wineries and New Zealand Beef and Lamb and New Zealand, and you just end up getting these referrals to all the different New Zealand agencies that are in North America. And over the years, as you would have seen from the newsletter, we performed at lots of events for Air New Zealand. What we'll do is we will perform for a First Nation if they're having a fundraising event or a powwow or a community day and they invite us to come, we will come. We will always support a First Nation. So we've done a lot of First Nation powwows and performed on their program. And then, so they're one group that we will always, including powwows for Native Americans. And then the other will be for New Zealand businesses. If there are New Zealand businesses or agency, Air New Zealand, Trade and Enterprise, the consulates or embassies, tourism board, all these different New Zealand businesses who come up here, wineries, beef and lamb, cheese, kiwi fruit. There's a whole lot of businesses who come up here to promote their products, and they'll often talk to the consulate and say, oh, it'd be so amazing if we could have a kapahaka group. And they'd go, yeah, we know one, we'll get them for you. And that's how it all began. But those are our two kaupapa, really, is if it's benefiting or promoting New Zealand, or New Zealand businesses, we'll tautoko, or if it's a First Nations event, we will tautoko. It's a hard one because every project, by notable, for me, that means it's had an impact of some sort. And it can be a really small impact or it can be a really big impact. But for some of our Māori organisations, that small impact is quite significant. So it may be as simple as getting asked to come in, maybe a Māori organisation, they've been audited and, the auditor has picked up 3 or 4 or 5 things that they need to fix, and they'll ring up and say, hey, can you help us? We're not quite sure what we should be doing here. And you'll go in and help them to remedy those things the auditor has pointed out so that they get through their audit process, get a clean tick, or often it's associated with certification or accreditation. So, we did in that situation, we don't do all the work to get them accredited. We might be just in that piece to get them over the line with remedying or helping them to fix 3 or 4 things. That it might be only 2 or 3 days work, but that getting them over the line and getting them accredited so they can hang that certificate on the wall and use that accreditation to apply for funding, to gain status, to show that they have good systems and stuff. But it has a big payoff for Māori organisations. So it's really hard to say what are notable projects and what aren't, because every single one of them, no matter if it's a 1-day workshop or it's a 2-year full-blown system review, you would hope that the workshop has just as much impact as the 2-year project. And that's how I kind of look at it, is every project's important. Every community we work with is important. If I kind of were to look at some of the big ones in New Zealand, we did quite a lot of work in the whānau water startup in the early 2000s, supporting groups to get started up with whānau water. That corrections project, reviewing all the healthcare in New Zealand's prisons, that's a project where you're actually impacting right across the country. So I thought, that's, if it lifts the standard where all inmates, Māori or not, are getting the kind of healthcare they need, that's a good thing. We don't want them coming out of prison sicker than when they came in. We actually want, if people haven't been diagnosed with conditions or something, you want that all picked up. You want good dental care picked up. You want good psychiatric care picked up. So Yeah, it's very hard to talk about all of the organisations we helped get accredited. Those accreditations, as I say, really do not only give them good internal practice, but they can put that stamp on every proposal they write, every service they deliver. They can give whānau confidence that we have good systems in this organisation. Quality is important to us. We measure things, we improve things. All of those messages are important for funders as well as for whānau that are using the service. It gives them credibility and all that. So all of the projects were important, and a lot came about through relationships that had been developed in the prior years with TPK and Māori Affairs and the health system. And some of the things we did back then really did carry through, that people go, oh yeah, I remember you, and I remember how you came, how you held yourself as a government employee. And I trusted you then, and I can probably trust you now, that you will take what you know and you'll help us. You'll help us get resources. You'll help us run our organisations really well. You'll help us engage with our whānau. So I think you can't, I guess what I'm trying to say is you can't flip-flop and say, well, I'm like this when I'm working for the government, but I'm like this when I'm being a consultant. Inherently, you've got to be your true self. You've got to be, your true personality, because you can't BS our people. They know when you're being fake and false, and we have really good radars for that. So the one lesson I had was, just be you. I was so buried in work in Canada that I hadn't even really been following the health and disability system review. So what actually happened was we lost our dad, and very unexpectedly, and it was kind of on, my sister and I were both here in Canada, and it was on our conscience that Mum was now home alone. And I thought, well, I've done 12 years here, it's probably time. So I agreed to move home. I said, look, I'll move home. You've got the swing of things now. You stay, and because you've only been here maybe 3 years at that point. So I decided to move home, which was a very hard decision because I loved it here, just loved living here in Vancouver. But I was also pleased that we didn't have to shut the team down. We could just keep the mahi going. So I moved home in early 2020, and then, of course, COVID hit. And suddenly we were kind of caught up in lockdowns and all this kind of stuff. And I hadn't even really figured out what work I was going to do. I was still doing Canada work remotely in New Zealand, and which was kind of easy because everybody was locked down doing work from home. And so I did that. I worked from home, still doing Canada work, until I was called again out of the blue, really unexpected, by Chad Paraone from the Health Transition Unit, which was based inside DPMC at the time. And he said, hey, what are you doing? I heard you're back, and are you interested in doing some work? And I was I was busy with the Canada stuff. I said, I might have maybe a day a week or something I could squeeze out. And he was like, give me two. Anyway, I ended up starting up with the Health Transition Unit, and he wanted me to actually work in the space of starting to look at how we create the iwi Māori partnership boards, but also to look at the commissioning plan for the Māori Health Authority, which was still being designed in many ways, the actual organisation. And we were still writing, papers to the government on what all the policy parameters would be, and the legislation was still being drafted. But there had been some money appropriated for the Māori Health Authority startup. So he was like, you need to get this money out the door and have a commissioning plan, and you need to start engaging iwi on the Iwi Māori Partnership Board concept. And so it just kind of snowballed from there. And suddenly it was 2 days, then 3 days, then full-time. So I was full-time in the unit with a group of other like-minded, because Chad just kept recruiting others from the sector. And yeah, we were a small team, maybe just, I don't know, 7 of us, I think, in the beginning in 2020 and 2021. And in order to get a lot of the work done, we had to basically steal Māori capability out of the district health boards and say, can we have some people come and be seconded into the unit to do work? So we were getting a lot of talent out of the DHBs to set up the Māori Health Authority, do that kind of commissioning design work, and what we'd do with the budget, and all of the pieces that it takes to start up an organisation, job descriptions and org charts and board governance operations, and what would be the recruitment process for the board members of the Māori Health Authority. And you're just constantly in communication with the minister about the minister's expectations. You're constantly connecting with other parts of the transition unit, because while our little team was designing the Māori Health Authority and the Iwi Māori Partnership Board framing, the rest of the transition unit was designing the new Health New Zealand and how they were going to merge 21 organisations and all of the pieces that would take, all the financials, the HR, everything. So, yeah, there were a lot of us working a lot of hours over a couple of years until 2022, when the Act came into being and the 2 entities were legal entities who could then, put their CEOs in place and their boards and get going. But yeah, it was a lot of work, and just many, many hours by lots and lots of people, because there was just so much to do. And we, as much as the decision was to make the Māori Health Authority a Crown entity, I guess one of our thoughts was, well, if we can prove our expertise and capability at managing this mahi called healthcare, then maybe one day they will transfer this entity or devolve it out to Māori. Maybe that could be on the horizon as a bit of an aspiration. And so the Iwi Māori Partnership Boards, and gearing them up and getting them to, hire good teams behind them, was really part of, you get ready, you grow your capability, because potentially the stuff the Māori Health Authority is doing could be transferred to you, some or all of it, we don't know, but that's a possibility. So yeah, it's been disrupted, of course, but it certainly was a very cool piece of work with a lot of committed people. And I'm not too caught up in the disestablishment, because it was a Crown entity. It wasn't a Māori entity. What I was more caught up in is, oh my God, what's going to happen to all of that work that our iwi Māori have done in the last couple of years, that they've put into the organisation, all of their whakaro and ideas and aspirations, all of the work done by teams around redesigning services and investing in healthcare differently. I just hope all of that mahi isn't lost. That's why I'm a fan, not just because I was there in the beginning echelons of building IMPB. It's more that I've seen now what they can do, and they're doing everything we envisaged they could do in a space of just 2 years. They've stood up and they've taken on this function, and they're just getting better and better and better at it as time goes on. I don't know, I'm an optimist. I think people will see the value of the iwi Māori partnership boards. I always thought they're a model across all of the social sectors, not just health, because you've got an organised group now with that attachment to iwi and hapū and community. You don't need to replicate that again and again for social development, for education, for something else, for something else. Like, here's a group that with the right capacity, they could be that mediator for the system and iwi and whānau on these social matters, because they're really starting to develop quite a bit of capability now. Again, wasn't on my radar. I'd already had my MBA, I think, and I thought, that's enough. I don't want to study anymore. I'm definitely not made for academia. I can tell you that. Somebody else told me that too, that no, this isn't a space for you. You're a practitioner. You're a kind of social science practitioner. You're not a researcher per se. Like, it's not my wheelhouse. But where it started was when I was working for the Health Funding Authority, maybe 96, 97. I had a particular CEO I worked for who was just amazing. He was actually from the UK, humble man. And I developed a real respect for him in his relationships. And one of those, interestingly, was with the late Tariana Turia. And at the time, she was leading Te o Ranganui Hauora in Wanganui, and they were getting their funding from us as the Regional Health Authority. And she and Niko Tangaroa and others from Wanganui would come to Wellington and meet with him and others. And obviously you hear all the time about I am the river and the river is me. And the CEO from the UK never quite cottoned on what that meant. He was like, I really want to understand what you're trying to say, Tariana, and how that translates into healthcare. He really authentically wanted to understand. And so Nico, I think, said, the only way you're going to understand is you've got to come on the river with me. And he said, okay. And he goes, and you bring all your managers, they need to understand too. And he said, okay. And he agreed. And so we were like up at Taumaranui, I think, somewhere south of there, and met Nico and his whānau, and they had the canoes ready. And we spent 4 days going down the Wanganui River with him. And he pointed out, the caves and the stories, and we slept overnight in the bush. Me, my CEO, and all these Pākehā colleagues of mine who bought, hair dryers, was such a crack up. But we paddled. We were in canoes, and all of us paddled. And honestly, for every single one of us, we were changed people by the end of that journey. And because we had like the experts with us telling us the story, and we were immersed in it, and we were feeling the river, and you could see what such a spiritual and special place it is. Probably one of my biggest highlights ever was going down Wanganui River over those 4 days with Nico. But after that, the CEO, he gained such respect from Tariana and Nico because he made that commitment, took his managers out of Wellington and made them canoe down the river. And yeah, it was life-changing, absolutely life-changing. But the reason I talk about him is, unbeknownst to me, he had put my name forward for a World Health Organization fellowship. And apparently it got approved. And so he calls me in and he says, you've got a World Health Organization fellowship. And I was like, what's that? And he goes, they give you a sum of money and you get to pick where you want to go in the world to learn about something associated with your work and within this budget. And part of your requirements is you have to organise it, you have to make all the contacts, do all the travel, and write a report at the end. And I couldn't believe it. I was like, oh my gosh. And I think it was $25,000. It was, yeah, mountains of money. And I, I was still in Māori health then and really thinking about, how do we really grow this Māori health sector. And so I thought I'll go to another Indigenous health area and ended up to go to North America. So long story short, I ended up organising an itinerary. I think I went through about 30 tribes in the States and maybe 15 up in Canada over a period of 9 months doing this fellowship, all paid for by that pūtea. And then I had to write a report, and I really got into detail, like how were they funding healthcare, how were they delivering it, how were they bringing their culture into it, who was governing it, and what are the loopholes and what are the benefits. And I just squeezed them dry of every bit of knowledge I could, and came home with like suitcases full of documents and reports that they gave me. But yeah, amazing experience. Very hard being away for that long, because I think my kids were quite young then too, and they were staying with Nanny and Koro, and then they met me when I finished in Vancouver, actually. So that's how it began, is 1998, doing that fellowship, spending that 9 months and seeing like, oh my gosh, they're way ahead of us. We're still doing these piddly little service contracts with our iwi, and they're already at a stage where they're managing the money. They're not getting contracts. The money's being handed to the tribe. Well, not handed. I mean, it is all accountable, but the money is being given to the tribe under a different kind of agreement for them to make decisions about what they deliver and how they deliver it. And it was completely a self-governance model. And I thought, wow, that'd be so cool if we could do that. But of course, a year later, government changed and we never ever got time to or chance to test it at the Health Funding Authority. So I parked it. I kept all the information and put it aside, and obviously went consulting. And then when I ended up back up in Canada in 2008, it was my chance to reconnect with those friends I'd made down in the States. And so I started visiting them again, or just contacting them and seeing what further progress they had made. And then for the work for building the First Nation Health Authority, we were starting to look at how they had built their health organisations. So we were doing official work visits down there, going to their conferences and stuff. And again, picking up suitcases full of information. And it was very useful in the work that we were doing around First Nations governance of healthcare. And then, out of the blue, we find out that Tā Mason Jury was coming to Vancouver to speak at a Indigenous conference. And so I got hold of him and said, we can pick you up and at the airport and come around for kai, and I'll invite our little group of Māori over, and then we'll come and watch him speak. So he did come over that night, and of course he was asking everybody if we were all studying. Are you all studying? You know why you've got time living over here? You don't have all these whānau obligations and stuff you have to do in your spare time. A good time to study. So he was kind of recruiting students. And we were all like, yep, okay, Mason, yep. And so when he was talking to me, and I was telling him about all the stuff I was learning from the tribes in the States and also the nations in Canada and the work at the First Nation Health Authority, he was like, you need to do a PhD. You really need to tell this story because you've picked up all this knowledge since your first trip in 99. And here we were now in, 2016 or something. He said, you've got all of this information. You need to do it. And I went, oh, mate, I'm so busy. I can't fit that in. La, la, la. Well, I got back and got contacted, or after he left, maybe 2 weeks later, I got contacted by a certain professor at Massey who said, Mason said I have to enroll you in the PhD program. I was like, no, I just said yes to make him happy. And he was like, no, you need to do it. This is an important piece of work and la da da. So that's how it began. I gotta say, I found the process really tough. It's you know, in our work, we kind of get to control a lot of how things look and design, all that stuff. When you write for an academic institution, it's all got to look a certain way and be a certain style. And I learned a very hard lesson, probably a year in, where my supervisor said he had read one of my draft 4 or 5. And he said, I want to ask you a question. Who are you writing this for? And I was like, our people, so that our people can learn from all the stuff they've done to get governance of healthcare, to get their own resources, to design their own delivery, and da da da. And he's going, you are not writing this you're writing this for the examiners. That's who you are writing for. You've got to get the examiner's endorsement of your research. Then you go and talk to the iwi. I was like, well, isn't that the same thing? he was like, no, your whole style of writing for sure speaks to iwi. Just the way you communicate is very much iwi facing. But it won't pass the, robustness of academic. You got to do more, you got to structure this, you got to have less of that and more of that and evidence for that. And I ended up, writing it in a way that was actually super uncomfortable. It was super unfamiliar. It's not the way I write. I don't write like this. I don't talk like this, but I have to be, all this, everything's referenced and everything's a certain way. And so I found that hard. I had interviewed 10 of my colleagues in North America, some chiefs of tribes, some federal government employees, some other consultants who worked, and they were amazing. And I just wanted to put everything they said into this thesis. But of course, I was told that, you need to make these transcripts shorter and you need to do more analysis, don't have so many quotes. But I just wanted their voice everywhere, which again was another challenge for me, very unnatural not to have a lot of their voice come through. And I was like, I spent like 5 hours with this person having a kōrero, and you want me to put that down to 2 sentences? Like, they're going to read this. And that would be so offensive for them to go, you mean I gave you all of that whakaro and you put it down to 2 sentences? Like, won't be talking to you again. And so those for me were the challenges of doing a PhD. I know I got there in the end with a lot of help. I feel sorry for my main supervisor because he really had to help me get through it and adjust how I do things. And after, getting to my age and creating my own style and then having to fit into this academic box. So I struggled. It wasn't easy for me at all, but got there in the end. And now the test for me was last year, because I had stayed in touch with my interviewees and they're good friends, great friends. So one of them said, hey, we've got a conference and I know you're almost finished your thesis. Can you come to the conference and present your findings? Which I had always planned to do because I thought before this thing goes anywhere, I've got to take it back to North America and make sure they're happy with what I've said, the assumptions I've made and the findings, because I'm talking about them, I'm talking about Native Americans and and Alaska Natives. So I want them to hear it and see it first, because if they're not happy, I'm going to change it. So I did present on it. One of the most nerve-wracking things ever, to present to a group of people when you're talking about those people and you aren't one of those people. That kind of third-party challenge. But I just thought, just be yourself, you just got to get through this. And I presented, and then I had so many come up afterwards saying, it's so good to have a helicopter view of what we're doing here. We're so in it that we don't get to kind of fly above it and see the whole picture. And you've done that, and that's super helpful to us. It'll help the tribes that are still making that journey. And of course, one of my examiners is a professor from Hawaii. And so he was saying, this helps us in Hawaii because we're trying to get there too. So, a resource like this and what they learned and what they did is all going to be useful for all of us as Indigenous people. So I felt good at the end, as much as the process was torturous, the end part was good. Even everybody who's challenged systems I work in, like I got to give Tariana Turia, like she gave our system help. She really did. She pushed us, but she made us better because of it. We may not have realised it at the time, but she made us step up and say, you need to do better for us. And the only way you can do that is come out, get to know our whenua, get to know our people, then we can have a conversation. And I may not have learnt that lesson immediately, but I certainly did by the time we came off the river. I was like, get it, I totally get it. And now I use that lesson for everything, whether it means you got to go to Lake Waikaremoana, or you got to go to Greymouth on the west coast, or you got to go to Invercargill, or you got to go to the Chathams, or whatever. If you truly want to do your job properly, you got to go there and you got to see what it's like to drive the road, or if there is one. You've got to experience the feel of the whenua that they're living in. Otherwise, you're never going to get it. You're never going to do them justice. There are a number of people in our startup phase who stuck with us and have continued to stick with us all the way through, as long as they've been in their roles. And I have acknowledged them in our newsletter. But they are, they've become very close friends. People I, try to visit or keep in touch with. And they, the fact that they trust you and keep coming back and is just, really, it's them that keep, little businesses like ours going, when you have those regular people who just continue to return. And the same with staff that have worked here. I think we did a list, and there's something like 50 or 60 people who have come in different roles, whether it's in administration or it's as a consultant, and they've stayed short time or they've stayed long time. There's a lot. And I've got to give it to the two that really helped with the management of the company, which was Karen Rangi and Marama Porori. Both of them, when we were co-directors at different times, they just added such a lot and shared the burden as well. So people who help you govern, and Kareen, like taking over Canada office so that I could move home. It's a big responsibility to say, oh my gosh, I've got to take over and run my sister's business she started in Canada, and not, and you're always nervous to say, I don't want to ruin it or anything. We try really hard to look after our staff, and they work hard. They put in the hours, and they do the trips away and to go to communities and travel out to the iwi, etc., and don't complain. They, I hope, love it as much as we do, and I'm sure they do because they're still working here. But all of the staff they all contribute as much as they get supported as well. Mentors, I couldn't name one because, again, I I feel like from the very time I left school and started working, that every single boss that I've had, every manager, right from, late 70s in Māori Affairs, Palmerston North, when I started in the Māori Land Court as a really young, fresh out of school person, they were just good from the get-go. They would support your development and they encourage you to, not get stuck in your role, but move to another team, learn more things, move to another department, learn more things. And all through, I can see their faces, the Rua Tinana, Eddie Moses, right through to Tom Parore, who was Māori trustee, Kara Puketapu, Tamati Reedy, Neville Baker, Wira Gardner, all of them I had were my managers, and I got to learn a piece of all of them as I kind of went through my work life, and then getting into health and having great CEOs, having great kaumātua wrapped around us like Auntie Mate Kaiwai, like Rongo Wirepa, and, culminating in Rob Cooper and David Moore and Graham, all of them. I'm someone who always thinks I've got lots more to learn. So I'm almost googly-eyed watching how they operate, listening to what their whakaro is and what they're responding on, what questions they're asking. If you kind of want to get anywhere, you just kind of follow the experts around and try and take as much as you can from them. And I think we apply that in our consulting work. The experts we're listening to now are the people in the tribes and the iwi and the nations. They're experts of their own destinies. All we have to do is be good listeners, which I think is how we've operated, or at least I have for most of my life. So I'm just super lucky. I've had a series of amazing leaders to work for, and I've taken something from all of them. It's made me what I am. Absolutely it has. And then I must thank Mason, Mason Jerry, for as much as didn't want to do a PhD, the fact he encouraged me to do it and then made it happen. And Chris Cunningham, who got me through it from Massey. I can now say, all right, there's a culmination of learnings from the last 30 years of working in the health system that I've now put together in one place, and I've got all of this other evidence that surrounds it, sitting in boxes and files, etc. And I can choose to use that knowledge now for the benefit of our people, or I can choose to go, oh, thank God that's over, and stick it on the shelf. But I choose to use it, and I do hope, that I continue to have great leaders to follow so that we can get to a place of greater governance, not just of healthcare, but of lots of parts of our lives. We have people who are willing to share how they did it, and we can take that and draw on it, I think. If we've supported organisations to be great in their communities, then we have achieved our goal. If they don't need to come back because they have everything they need, they can be quite self-sufficient, then we've achieved our goal. And that includes government, which is why I think the need for advice is probably going to go on for a long time, because you don't shift government structures very easily. But if you can create the right policy and legislation through government that opens the doors for our people, then the world's their oyster. That's what I feel has allowed our other Indigenous brothers and sisters to get ahead. It's not so much what they're doing individually, it's the fact they've created Indian policy in the US that has opened doors. Because once the policy's there, the government agencies kind of have to align with it. But you've got to fight to get the right policy settings. for some reason, I just feel like I'm looked after and I'm guided from up there. And people talk about being guided by their tipuna and stuff, and I feel I am, because a lot of the places I land, I haven't planned for. I just ended up there, and then kind of like, God, how did that happen? And I think they've put me. Somebody said that they're putting you where you need to be. So it's kind of like Canada was a time you needed to be, because you needed to learn all that stuff so that you could, write your thesis, so that you can have evidence to help our people back home as we, try and find our way into greater governance over health and stuff. So, and we seem to be on that cusp right now of, kotahitanga and our movement and our wanting to be heard and listened to and acknowledged and recognised as sovereign, and all of that fits with everything that I've had to learn in the last 20 years, 30 years. We are in such a privileged position to come into people's communities, into people's homes, and be welcomed wherever we go. And not many people get to experience what we experience. And I've got to see, pretty much probably 95% of New Zealand because of this mahi. And not just say I've been there, but I can say I know someone there, let's call him for coffee, and to have connections and friends and whānau. It's just a very privileged kind of role. And I never ever thought it would go for 25 years. Not in a, I was like 3 to 5, then we'll be back in the government. But no.